The Wild Ride of the Barefoot Bandit, a comedy of crime and consequences. It was a moonlit night when a tall, slim figure crept through the shadows, barefoot on the outskirts of a quiet rural town. He moved like a ninja. If ninjas wore dirty sweatpants and left muddy footprints everywhere. His name? Colton Harris-Moore. But he was becoming known to the world by a much more captivating title, the Barefoot Bandit. This wasn't just a nickname, it was a lifestyle, a philosophy. Shoes, overrated. Caution, non-existent. Colton wasn't here for the careful life. He was here to steal cars, planes, and hearts. Mostly just cars and planes. From a troubled kid growing up in a dysfunctional home, he transformed into one of America's most infamous outlaws, carving his name, literally, into the annals of crime history. And if we're being honest, he made it look way too fun for his good. Part 1. From Home to Hoodlum. Born on March 22nd, 1991, on Camano Island, Washington, Colton didn't exactly get the smoothest start in life. Picture it. His dad skipped town before he could even form words, and his mother had a love affair with the bottle, not exactly winning any Parent of the Year awards. With little guidance and much free time, young Colton did what any kid might do when the adult world lets them down. He turned the entire island into his personal playground. Now, this wasn't your average tree-climbing, fort-building kid. Colton had bigger ideas. While most kids his age were stealing cookies from the jar, he was stealing, well, pretty much everything. It started small: food, supplies, a few trinkets here and there. But even at 10 years old, Colton had a flair for the dramatic. He'd leave little taunting clues behind, like muddy footprints on kitchen floors, or hastily written notes that basically said, "Catch me if you can." The local police? Let's just say they weren't thrilled. It's one thing to deal with the occasional troublemaker, but a barefoot tween with a vendetta against shoes and a knack for disappearing into the woods. That's a different story. Colton's early crimes weren't exactly glamorous, but they hinted at something more. He wasn't just stealing because he needed to, he was stealing because he could. He craved the rush of it all. And so, as he grew older, so did his ambitions. Burglarizing homes wasn't enough anymore. If he was going to live outside the law, he might as well do it with some style. Enter planes. Part 2. The Unlikely Aviator. Let's get one thing straight. Colton Harris-Moore had zero flight experience. Not a single lesson, not even one of those "this is your captain speaking" simulations at Chuck E. Cheese. Yet somehow, in 2008, at just 16 years old, Colton decided he was going to steal a plane. Why? Because who needs a learner's permit when you've got reckless confidence and no sense of self-preservation? He didn't go for a small, easy-to-manage aircraft either. No. Colton opted for a Cessna 182, a real beauty with wings, just sitting there, practically begging to be stolen. And, in the dead of night, he did just that. He jumped in, fired it up, and took off into the night sky like a kid playing a video game. Except this was real life. Now, any sane person would have realized mid-flight that this was a horrible idea. But Colton? Nah. He just kept flying, soaring over the dark forests below like a barefooted Peter Pan. Sure, he had no idea what he was doing, and sure, the plane crash-landed in a field. But the fact that he got it in the air at all? Legendary. The media caught wind of his antics, and soon, Colton was everywhere. The press couldn't get enough of him. The Barefoot Bandit had officially taken flight, and the world loved him for it. There was something undeniably charming about this teenage outlaw who didn't play by the rules, whether those rules involved the law or footwear. Part 3, Catch Me If You Can. Spoiler, you can't. By now, the authorities were in full-on panic mode. It wasn't just a local nuisance anymore. This kid had stolen a plane, for crying out loud. The FBI got involved. Manhunts were launched, and suddenly, Colton was more famous than a Kardashian. The thing was, he kept getting away. Colton had turned evasion into an art form. He'd break into homes, steal food and supplies, maybe a car or two, then disappear into the woods like some kind of modern-day Robin Hood, minus the giving to the poor part. He wasn't just stealing to survive anymore. It was the thrill, the audacity of it all. And the police, well, they were losing their minds. At one point, Colton even left a note for the police at a crime scene that said, "Cops want to play, huh? Well, it's no little game. It's war. See ya." That's right, he was taunting them. The Barefoot Bandit had gone full cat-and-mouse mode, and the world was watching. And rooting for him, of course. But Colton wasn't just a thief. He was a brand. The barefoot thing, iconic. He didn't just avoid shoes out of preference, he made it part of his legend. Who needs Nike sponsorships when your muddy footprints are trending worldwide? To Part 4, a cross-country caper. As if things couldn't get more ridiculous, in 2010, Colton decided to take his shenanigans international. But first, he needed another plane. So naturally, he stole one from Bloomington, Indiana. Now this wasn't just a joyride around the block. Colton had set his sights on something a bit more exotic. The Bahamas. Yep, you read that right. Colton, with absolutely no formal flight training, aimed to fly solo across hundreds of miles of open ocean. It's the kind of reckless plan that makes you question whether this kid was a genius or just didn't care about the concept of mortality. Surprisingly, he made it most of the way before crash landing in shallow waters off Great Abaco Island in the Bahamas. Most people would have accepted defeat at this point, stolen a pineapple and called it a day. But not Colton. Oh no. He immediately stole a boat and led the Bahamian police on a high-speed chase through the crystal-clear waters like something straight out of an action movie. Except, this was real life. Part 5, the dramatic finale. Colton's Caribbean vacation didn't last long. On July 11th, 2010, after years of dodging the law, the Barefoot Bandit was finally captured. The chase had come to an end. Colton, the boy who had stolen planes, boats, cars, and the nation's attention, was finally behind bars. But the legend didn't end there. In court, Colton was a changed man, or at least he seemed to be. Gone was the cocky teenager who left mocking notes for the police. In his place was a young man who understood the gravity of his actions. He spoke about his regrets, his desire to change, and the damage he had caused to the people who had unwittingly been caught up in his wild spree. He wasn't a hardened criminal. He was a kid who had gotten in way over his head. The media painted him as a sort of modern-day Jesse James. But in reality, Colton was just a boy who wanted more out of life. A better life, a sense of freedom and control over his destiny. It's just that his way of finding it was, well, less than legal. Part 6. Lessons from the Barefoot Bandit. In the end, Colton Harris-Moore's story isn't just a tale of theft and evasion. It's a story about the desire for freedom, the need for belonging, and the consequences of chasing your dreams in all the wrong ways. Let's face it, deep down, we all have a little bit of the Barefoot Bandit in us. Not the part where we steal planes, please don't steal planes, but the part that longs for adventure, that dreams of escape, that wants to break free from the rules and chart our own course. Colton was chasing something bigger than himself. He just went about it in the worst possible way. But here's the kicker. Even in the midst of his outrageous crime spree, Colton taught us something important. He reminded us that life is unpredictable, that sometimes we make choices without thinking through the consequences, and that rebellion, while thrilling in the moment, almost always comes with a price. For Colton, that price was years behind bars. But as he sat in prison, he also had time to reflect. He spoke about wanting to use his experiences for good, maybe even turning his obsession with aviation into a legitimate career. Because here's the thing, Colton was never a dumb kid. He was smart, resourceful, and full of potential. He just needed guidance, something he never really had. So, what's the takeaway from the Barefoot Bandit? Maybe it's this. Chase your dreams, but keep your shoes on. Adventure is out there, but you don't need to break the law or your toes to find it.